Thank you for such a great discussion and aligned with the civil liability discussion and problem that we have around attribution and how it applies to DAOs. And for that, we'll have João Sousa to discuss that. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Margaret. I would like firstly to start, I think, to this for research in private law and my colleagues, friends, and co-researchers of Mr. Paul Professor Malena, and Mr. Schleck, of course, João, and Mark. It's an honor to meet you here. I would also like to greet and thank the other members of this panel. And as a member of this observatory, I think I should have made sure that I'm really the first to talk, so it's much higher now that we call them in your speeches. Yes, so, okay, whether it makes sense to speak about the knowledge of a DAO would be the first basic question, of course. DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization which relies on blockchain technology and smart contracts. By intuition, the first reaction to answer is to answer negatively, because ultimately a DAO is just a line of code laid on blockchain technology, and epistemologically speaking, knowledge is understood as a human capacity, a specific human capacity to maintain a kind of relationship with matters of fact. However, civil law is autonomous in the conceptualization of knowledge and its attribution. The concept of knowledge and its attribution is always a problem of interpretation of certain rules. In the case at hand, DAOs consist of a smart contract conceptualized as an organization of people. Some describe DAOs as the first company without people. But this description is, however, misleading, since natural persons are also involved in DAOs, just not in the central management of the organization. As even if particular form of organization, DAOs are a form of cooperation of people that imply a risk of knowledge fragmentation due to the division of labor. In recent years, the problem of knowledge attribution has been mainly discussed concerning legal persons. And DAOs are often qualified as partnerships, but in most jurisdictions, they are not recognized as legal persons. In Portugal, however, DAOs are to be qualified as civil partnerships. And in Portugal, most legal scholars see civil partnerships as legal persons. But even if DAOs were not to be qualified as legal persons, the principles of knowledge attribution must apply to all forms of organization that can lead to a fragmentation of knowledge. And that's indisputably the case with DAOs. So, understanding the decision-making process of a DAO is the utmost relevance to the problem of knowledge attribution. Knowledge is always legally relevant in the context of an action or an omission. Legal consequences are always related to the fact that the agent acts despite of his knowledge or due to know some specific facts. And that's the reason why the most basic attribution case in organizations is that of the attribution of knowledge of members of the corporate governing bodies. Mainly the executive board, but also the shareholders meeting and even the supervisory board within their legal and statutory powers and duties. Because organs act on behalf of a legal person to enable it to participate in legal transactions, it becomes necessary to attribute their knowledge to the legal person. In the specific case of DAOs, directors are not appointed. In addition to the collective body consisting of all members, so the token holders, there is typically no executive board with decision-making powers. This means that if knowledge is legally relevant in the context of an action, to consider the problem of knowledge attribution, it is necessary to analyze the decision-making process of a DAO to determine concretely who has the power to decide when and how a DAO to react. To understand the decision-making process of a DAO, I can use a simple example of a proposal-based governance system with a yes-no majority system. for proposals required for approval and its execution. Proposals can be about, for example, investing tokens owned by the DAO, and the votes can be weighted according to the initial contribution of the token holders or to their reputation within the DAO. The smart contract is independently and automatically, the smart contract is after that independently and automatically executed if a specific majority is reached. And from a technical point of view, it is not necessary for management to act independently of the internal decision-making process, neither internally or externally. Decisions are therefore made by DAOs token holders. Their collective decisions are thus to be attributed to the DAO, and the rights and obligations arising from its execution affect the collective assets. To fully understand the problem of knowledge attribution, it's also required to address the way that token holder decisions are executed by DAOs. A DAO is pure software. It has, at least not yet, the ability to manufacture products, to write code, to develop hardware, to sweep the streets. For that, the DAO needs actors in the physical world. DAOs do it traditionally in two different ways. Firstly, the DAO can turn to the so-called contractors who develop products or supply services. This is done in the form of smart contracts supplemented by natural language descriptions. Therefore, as a rule, the proposal is written in natural language together with the corresponding program smart contract that defines the relationship between the DAO and the contractor, the contractual obligations, and the terms of execution. Discussions around the proposal held between the token holders can take place on-chain or off-chain via a service chosen by the DAO. Smart contracts are, in this case, used as a tool for the execution of token holders' resolutions. When used as a tool for entering into legal transactions with third parties, smart contracts are also to be qualified as declarations of intent, which have their origin in the token holder's wallet and are transmitted by the algorithm of the DAO. Smart contracts are, in this case, true contracts. And as a result of my short description of DAO's internal operation, it is then possible to establish that the concrete terms of the execution of the smart contract are predetermined and pre-programmed. Code is or must be designed according to the proposal made by the token holder, and the execution decision is made by the token holders collectively who vote the proposal that is automatically executed in case of approval. Thus, the execution of the smart contract can be ultimately considered the act of those responsible for its conception and concrete design. Token holders are supposed to decide, and despite the possible large number of participants, the organization and management of the DAO are still strongly personalized. In addition to the possibility of DAOs acting into contractual relationships with third parties directly via smart contracts, a person, for example a company, can be also interposed as a kind of trustee who acts externally for the DAO, often referred as a middle web. This is so because it still can be problematic for traditional companies to engage or to interact with the DAO on a business basis if it does not have a physical address, and especially concerning also regulatory problems or restrictions. With the legal effort, DAOs are therefore able to link the digital world to the physical world of contractors. This company is strictly distinguished from a possible company of the token holders because ultimately they cannot control it. It's like a sub-DAO through which the DAO engages with third parties. Well, that holds also some assets and also, for example, raise funds. It is then said that as far as this construction is disclosed to third parties, that claims and liabilities arise exclusively to the legal record. In this case, after the approval of the proposal within the DAO regarding matters like decisions concerning profit sharing or with investments, token holders instruct the legal record, which is then responsible for execution of the approved proposals on behalf of the DAO. Already bearing in mind the internal and external terms of action of the DAO, I can now address the terms of in which knowledge can be attributed to DAOs. Knowledge can be relevant in a variety of normative places. But considering the specificity of DAOs and their action based on smart contracts, I will analyze the problem of knowledge attribution in the context of the legal framework of error or mistake in the declaration and fraud and goals. According to the Portuguese law, but knowledge plays a similar role, particularly in the civil law jurisdictions. So, as I went before, knowledge is deemed to be legally relevant in the context of an action or an omission. I will therefore consider the knowledge of token holders because they make DAOs capable of acting. Considering the case of action based on smart contracts, it is essential to bear in mind that while obligations are automatically executed and the smart contract is executed exactly how it is programmed to be executed, it is not guaranteed that the code or its complete design matches the will of the contracting parties. It is therefore possible to have a divergence between the proposal made in natural language and the smart contract. As those can act and participate in legal transactions, knowledge provisions must apply to them. It is consequently necessary to ask if there is knowledge or a duty to know accessory to the DAO's action. The answer is positive if there is knowledge or a duty to know some facts by those who made and approved the proposal. This raises another problem. Transactions on blockchain are made synonymously, which makes it to be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to track token holders and therefore their knowledge. It is therefore necessary to resort to the rules of the known experience and ask if token holders acting with due care should have known the divergence between the natural language using the proposal and the smart contract code. In the case at hand, let me assume that the token holders, if acting with due care, should have known the divergence between the proposal and the code supporting the smart contract and its essentiality for the party. The attributed duty to know or knowledge of the essentiality of the token holders of the DAO may be legally relevant in the context of the legal framework of the mistake in the declaration. In this case, the will of the counterparty is correctly formed because it's based on the natural language accompanying the smart contract code that defines the relationship between the DAO, the contractual obligations, and the terms of execution. However, at the time of the will externalization, a failure arises from the discrepancy between the natural language and the code in such a way that the declaration does not match the will of the third party. Therefore, the agreement is violable because there are grounds for considering that the DAO knew or should have known the essentiality for the counterparty of the element on which the mistake was based. The DAO itself is therefore exposed to agreement and pre-contractual reconcilability in this case. It is also possible that only positive knowledge is relevant in the context of a knowledge provision. As I already said, it is extremely difficult to track the token holders and their positive knowledge of certain facts. However, this is not a problem exclusive to DAOs, token holders, or performers in the blockchain domain. Also, in the case of individuals, there is the difficulty associated with proving an internal fact and, in this case, the positive knowledge. The problem is different, but it seems that it can be solved in a very similar way. As I also said, in the context of knowledge provision, it is sanctioned the fact that the agent acts despite of knowing the specific facts. There is therefore some kind of assimilation between the fault provisions, and in this case, willful misconduct, and knowledge provisions. In both cases, knowledge and will are always at stake. Strictly speaking, the complete terms of legal relevance of positive knowledge and DAOs differ. However, the assessment related to the existence of positive knowledge or willfulness is the same. There is eventual willfulness or zones in equality, and eventual knowledge if, given the specific risk situation, there are reasons to assume that the agent completely represented the possibility of certain state of affairs, the so-called knowledge development, and complied with it by acting, the so-called willful element. In short, we face a normative assessment and not a psychological one. Applying this idea to the case presented, positive knowledge of token holders can be assumed if there is a notorious or evident disparity between the proposal and the code. For example, above. In such terms that one have to conclude that the token holders intentionally made the counterparty incur a mistake, or that, knowing the counterparty potential mistake, they concealed it. Again, this knowledge of the token holders is attributable to the DAOs, thus being exposed to the DAO itself, thus being exposed to annulment and to willful contractual liability. Before releasing you for me, I must also consider the possibility of DAOs using the legal record. The legal record does not fall under the organizational responsibility of the DAO being legally and organizationally independent. This fact for itself should prevent the attribution of knowledge of the legal record to the DAO. As I said, the legal record is an entity, as an entity, is strictly distinguished from the DAO. But attribution of knowledge is also possible outside and between different organizations, persons, or companies. There are, however, no clear rules to determine whether the knowledge of third parties not engaged in the principal's organization is to be attributed to the principal. And this is not surprising because it is often emphasized that the problem of knowledge attribution cannot be decided with a logical or conceptual stringency, entailing rather an evaluative assessment. And in any case, and even if abstractly and always considering the necessity to address the specific case, it is also possible to address the relationship that is traditionally established between the DAO and the legal record. Traditionally, it is said that only simple management tasks can be delegated to subordinate management levels or entrusted to external services providers. In this case, DAOs, due to their nature, it is likely, in the case of DAOs, it is likely, given the interposition of the legal record, that some of these matters are delegated. And by adopting this course of actions, it seems clear that the DAO is transferring management functions to another natural or legal person that otherwise would have to be performed by the DAO using its own material or personal resources. Shortly, the DAO outsources management functions to the legal record. Let me consider a case where a user pays a company to use its hardware or software, and the maintenance of the hardware or software is outsourced to a third-party company. Generally speaking, a counterparty of a company whose knowledge is internally split up is protected against the company being able to invoke ignorance solely based on its organizational structure. And this is not limited to the company's employees or auxiliaries falling inside its organization. For a counterparty, it makes no difference whether a company performs their obligations with the involvement of its own employees or a third party. What truly matters is that the obligation is complied in accordance with the agreement. As in most of the cases, for the counterparty, it is not even recognizable whether a service has been outsourced or if the service provider performs by itself. It seems appropriate to apply the principles of knowledge attribution to contractual constellations of service outsourcing if the situation is comparable to a company organization. Returning to DAOs and legal records, we are not just facing outsourcing performance related to contractual obligations vis-à-vis third parties. Somehow, the DAOs organization is being outsourced. The reasons to apply the attribution of knowledge are therefore to apply the attribution of knowledge principles are therefore reinforced, as the DAO in this case is organized in such a way that part of its scope of action is outsourced to a natural or an independent legal entity. If knowledge were not to be attributed in this case, the DAO itself would have in its own hands the chance to evade the attribution of knowledge by continually outsourcing tasks to the legal record. Denying knowledge attribution would then create an incentive to split knowledge and manipulate knowledge attribution principles. Additionally, it would be contrary to the general sense of justice that companies and DAOs were allowed to avoid their knowledge responsibility by outsourcing, especially since this is often not recognizable to the counterparty. In this respect, a counterparty would suffer considerable disadvantage compared to a counterparty benefiting from the performance of a service provider performed by itself. Therefore, in principle, the division of labor definition may fit to the outsourcing situation. Outsourcing of corporate functions, and mainly management functions, is to be addressed as a sub-case of division of labor, as the situation is not fundamentally different. The knowledge of the legal record is therefore increasable to be attributed to the DAO in the context of its action on behalf of the DAO. So, thank you very much.